TV, live from the UN press room at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. I am your host, Raya Salter, and my co-host today is Bendell. Today's program and urgent work for the delegates at work right now here in these halls is climate justice, getting real about loss and damage. So the breaking news is that for the first time, loss and damage will be on the agenda for this year's negotiations. In fact, the start of COP was delayed as nations wrangled over the inclusion of this as an agenda item. Of course, this is after the catastrophic year that left 37 million people facing hunger and starvation in the drought-stricken Greater Horn of Africa, and a third of Pakistan underwater due to unprecedented rainfall. The focus of COP27 will be the issues of reparations, or loss and damage. Last year in Glasgow, a coalition of mostly developing nations, representing 6 out of every 7 people in the world, 6 out of every 7 people in the world demanded reparations. The countries most responsible for greenhouse gas emissions commit to pledging money for loss and damage. This call for reparations was dismissed by the global North, led by the United States, who fear liability for the crisis that they have caused. In fact, earlier this year, US climate envoy John Kerry said that a focus on loss and damage, in his words, could delay our ability to do the most important thing of all, which is to achieve mitigation sufficient to reduce the level of adaptation. But this idea that the focus on overall emissions reductions is of primary importance dismisses the idea of climate justice. As negotiations stall each year and fail to reach consensus among the major emitters, the Global South experiences more and more loss and damage, and the need for reparations only grows. So what does loss and damage mean? Climate impacts which cannot or have not or will not be avoided either by mitigation, which is avoiding and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or adaptation, which is adjusting to current and future climate impacts. Loss, things that are irrevocably lost, such as lives, a way of living, a historical site, a culture, a people. Damage, things that can be repaired or recovered, such as roads, buildings, or crop yields. What's important to understand is that loss and damage, reparations are separate and apart from any adaptation or mitigation fund. So right now, loss and damage is on the agenda here at COP. And it is also mentioned in the Paris Agreement, which we are, of course, here to implement, even though now it has become insufficient. In both areas, however, both now and in the Paris Agreement, exists only with caveats that actually remove the liability from the global North for loss and damage. Nevertheless, the nations of the global South have shown up in force at this COP. This COP on the continent of Africa will be about loss and damage. So here with us to discuss the urgent issue of climate justice and reparations is Dr. Bendell, a full professor of sustainability leadership at the University of Cumbria in the UK, as well as Dr. Stella Mbau, who runs LOABOA, and we'll hear more from Jem and Dr. Mbau later on. But first, we will speak to Chie Bastida. Xie is a 20-year-old climate justice activist from Mexico, where she forms part of the Otomi Toltec indigenous community. She is the co-founder of the Re-Earth Initiative and studies at the University of Pennsylvania, where she is pursuing a BA in environmental studies with a concentration in policy. She has written op-eds and contributions in several books, including All We Can Save, and has been invited to talk on global platforms to call for immediate action on all fronts. Welcome so much. Thank you for joining us, Xie.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for listening, and thank you for your kind introduction and also the overview on loss and damage. So, as you mentioned, I come from a community in central Mexico, and my community actually suffered from flooding in 2015 when I was 13 years old. But before suffering from flooding, we saw the impacts of industries polluting our waters, Mexico City taking away the water from our aquifer. It was the mixture of taking away extraction, pollution, and climate disaster. And these communities are looking more and more like this for youth around the world. We are no longer looking at what the climate crisis is going to look like in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. We are living through all of these disasters combined. So when we talk about loss and damage, we're saying it is naive to think that we can only mitigate, because we also have to adapt to this changing world, to the fact that we're already feeling the impacts of the climate crisis. What we're specifically asking for with loss and damage is the creation of a loss and damage financing facility, meaning that there is going to be a lot of money funneled into loss and damage, hopefully, and that money needs to travel to the community. It cannot stay just at the government level. It has to make its way to the ground, because we are feeling the harshest impacts of the climate crisis. Youth from all around the world have chosen 3 things to focus on at this COP, 3 negotiation tracks. One of them is loss and damage, the second one is finance, and the third one is adaptation. So we can see that they're all interconnected, and we know what we have to fight for. We are here to elevate that this is an African COP. We are here to elevate that the global north has to repair all of the damage that it has done through years of colonization, through years of my own community. I don't have an indigenous last name because it was taken from us by our colonizers. My parents gave me an indigenous name, and it is a way of reclaiming who we are and where we come from. But this is just the beginning of that journey of giving back from everything that has been taken from us. So that is why we are here as youth and not, I'm missing a week of school right now. In my own school, we are doing actually an occupation. We just did 39 days of occupation to demand that the University of Pennsylvania divest from fossil fuels. And they haven't. And their net zero target is 2042. So we're talking here about doing actions at the very, very local, small level and at the global level, because we know that they're all connected. At the end of the day, we are not feeling the worst impacts of the climate crisis in these negotiating rooms with AC. We all have our hotel wristbands on now. This is not the real world. The real world is out there. The real world is suffering from drought. The real world is suffering from flooding. And we need money to be given to the communities that need it most. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. If you could give one message to the leaders that are meeting in these rooms right now on this important topic, what would it be?
The message for world leaders that youth want to give is that it is irresponsible and offensive to delay action. I am going to love somebody who is alive in 2100. My grandkids will be alive in the year 2100. We're talking about 2030 and 2050 targets, but you need to assure me that my grandkids are going to have a safe future. We cannot keep stalling. We need to stop all fossil fuel investments, all fossil fuel proliferation. We need to stop the destruction of nature, and we need to start giving back to those communities who have been targeted the hardest.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. What does it mean to center youth? What youth in the climate struggle? What is the importance of intergenerational climate justice?
Well, I don't think youth have ever been as important as right now, because we are here representing those generations that are not with us yet. And I feel that weight on me every single day. The weight of my children asking me what world I'm bringing them into. And we are seeing, the statistics. For example, the New York Times said that by 2070, 16% of the world might be uninhabitable due to how hot it can get. I don't know what an uninhabitable world looks like. We don't know what no coral reefs look like. I can cry thinking about my hometown being flooded. And that is what we need to bring back into these rooms. The emotion of what it feels to see your home being stripped away from you. And I think we get too caught up in the jargon of the UN, in the jargon of what is acceptable in negotiations, to remember that there are people with feelings, with futures that are being taken away. And I am here as a young person missing school and maturing way too fast to talk to you about what it's like for me to be the most vulnerable and share my story of the climate crisis. It is enough. It is time for all of us to get together, open our hearts, and say we are gonna come together to save this planet, and we will.
Thank you so much. I get chills listening to you. Thank you so much for your strong voice. Everyone, we must support our youth leaders like Shie. Now I'd like to turn it over to Professor Jen Bendell.
Thank you, Raya, and thank you, Xia. Yeah, it's really important to reconnect with the emotion of this, which can be lost in these kind of venues. And it's also important to remember that charity is not justice. If one side has no power, then there's no negotiation, which therefore can't lead to justice, which then can't also lead to healing. So I was very impressed by our next speaker's recent articles in resilience.org for how she communicates a dignified and self-respecting view of climate justice, including the matter of reparations and loss and damage. Dr. Stella Nyambura Mbau is from Kenya, where she works every day on climate resilience, including agroforestry. She's also a signatory to the Scholars' Warning on Societal Disruption and Collapse, like myself, and now 700 scholars from 40-odd countries. So I'm very pleased we're going to hear from Stella now on climate justice.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'll be sharing with you today about droughts in East Africa, the impact that has on communities on the ground, and about Western activism focusing on solidarity and climate justice based on demanded by the Global South. The drought in East Africa is probably, most of you have heard about it. It's been in the news for a while. It started in 2020 as a result of 4 failed rain seasons. Is it new? No. In the past 10 years, we've had 2 other drought spells. The first in 2010, 2011. The next 2016, 2017. This one 2020 and still running. And the starvation, obviously, further made worse by COVID and the locust invasion. And while we have some stats for you, it's difficult to quantify some of the non-economic impacts. For example, the case of pastoral communities in Kenya selling their cattle at giveaway prices, their source of livelihood. For the Maasai, for example, the story goes that a heavenly being came down floating on a cloud, a cow in hand, and gave the cow to the Maasai people. So that's the essence of their religion and the importance of cows to their community. But now that they have to sell these sickly cows underpriced just to feed themselves and their families, it's difficult to quantify what kind of distress that is. which means the cost of climate to these communities in the end greatly undervalued. So tracing our steps back to the root cause, we know that carbon activity since the mid-1700s have led to the accumulation of greenhouse gases and consequently led to warming and the changing in our climate systems. We all know that. The impact of which is disproportionate. We also know that. The IPCC reported that there is high confidence the temperatures across Africa have risen at a faster rate than the global average since the pre-industrial period. For Africa, this has meant rising temperatures, drought, floods, locust invasions, but also, consequently, civil unrest, food insecurity, water scarcity, degraded lands, and so much more. We know the promises at a previous COP of the $100 billion annually for adaptation, which would help reduce risk if committed to adaptation. But we also know most of the funding goes to mitigation projects because of the promise of a return on investment, like the solar farms and the e-vehicles. So even so, aid is needed because even rains coming at this point will not grow food fast enough to feed the starving. And because any losses, damages from the changing climate, whether past or present, are unduly being borne by the South, made worse by underlying conditions like poor infrastructure and governance issues. Having said that, I'm also aware that this conversation has been taking place since the early 1990s, and in disregard of the suffering in the South, it is possible that nothing changes today or in the next 2 weeks at this, our African COP. We say that leaders in the global North are close to centers of power, political and economic. But the resources behind these systems have been historically and continue today to be sourced from the South and from First Nations and their territories. The most vulnerable today had and have altogether the resources that built these powers in the North. Leaders in the South, aware of this, unified and demanding justice from the North would be a great show of solidarity, might influence some decisions in their favor, but shouldn't be the be-all and all. There's plenty in the South for self-sufficiency or leverage, depending on the North to come to our rescue in the way we need it or deserve it. Given the scale of present and historical injustices and the fact that that hasn't happened yet, we have to be open to the likelihood that it might indeed never happen. But what does that mean for us and here and now? It means reworking our strategies, definitely moving ourselves from this dependence on the North, meeting our request or demand for climate justice. It means engaging in actions that enable our communities in the South to be more aware of the situation, the cause, the effects of climate change, the reason for their suffering, hopefully then evoking their agency and understanding that the root cause of their suffering is the use of fossil fuels, which is important because most of us are removed from these extraction sites or manufacturing processes. They shoulder these climate impacts unaware, but on the other hand, they know they're suffering best and should therefore have the opportunity to voice their own demands for justice. This is the only path to true climate justice. Thank you.
Stella, thank you for that. I want to ask you one question. This is your passion and your profession, and not only working locally on resilience as you do daily, you're now participating a lot more in speaking out about climate justice. What really matters to you the most in all of this?
I don't know if saying justice is enough, but yeah, there's this feeling that if when you know that your own people are going through so much and they did not contribute to it, there's a different kind of pinch. Yeah, I think for me, just justice to see, and it's not necessarily given by the North. It could be just an empowerment of the people, and having their voices heard.
Thank you. I think I'll take the podium just to offer a few comments before we then round up. So, here we are at the epicenter of blah, 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 the epicenter of failure. And so I want to share a few thoughts on that. Like, why is it that climate justice has been marginalized? Why is it that all the promises seem never to be delivered on? And why is it that people think if you ask people what they really think about all these demands now for payments for loss and damage, they think it's just not going to happen. This is the only Lamborghini I ever want to own, and I'll say why in a minute. Because for me, climate chaos is a disaster that capitalism accelerated, distracted us from, and then limited our response for life-critical decades. Today, the global capitalists are now coaxing experts and politicians to spend our public funds on yet further distractions. They pretend that technology and enterprise will fix the collapse of the biosphere so they can then keep their income and privilege and their prestige. That is why this UN conference is becoming a career fest and trade fair at the end of the world. We see that these halls are full of people busy demonstrating their concern and capability to each other to create a shared delusion that infinite green growth is both true and moral. Is it any surprise that this charade has its latest act in a venue that before we showed up was branded as the Lamborghini Conference Center? The desire for ostentatious consumption is a global one, and it's a sign of sickness in modern culture. It's that culture which helps us destroy both people and planet, even when we can see it. And these conferences are perpetuating that culture under the guise of caring about this carnage. Yes, the 30 years of COPs have been a great success in helping the elites pretend something is being done while not actually addressing the root causes of the problem. Leaders here have less of a credibility problem than a capitalism problem and a consumer culture problem. Instead, a serious response to climate and justice would redesign our economic and monetary systems, our banking systems, to allow a post-growth era. Unfortunately, that's not going to be done voluntarily, which means that climate justice will need to involve struggle as much as request. So concerned people in the global north will be seeking more direct relationships with climate activists in the global south, helping them to build their movements that require change of us, not just requesting it of us. And that will include them challenging the people, organizations, and countries of the world that are richer, and that could help. That's why after yesterday's swearing of the Scholars' Oath to the Future, I'm very grateful to have been seated with these women activists from the global south today. And if you're watching at home, know that this room is half full. The people here do not care as much about these issues as being in the Innovation Pavilion, doing their job and making more money. So it's going to be up to you at home to do something about this agenda if you care. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Bendell. Thank you, Shay. Thank you, Dr. Mbau. And thank you to all of the sponsors and supporters of Facing Future TV. I am Raya Salter, saying good evening from COP27, Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. Thank you very much.